Welcome back to our 12th lecture in Revelation class. If you count the extra video I asked you to watch, that'd be 13 maybe, but 12 in this series. Today we're going to be talking about not a particular part of Revelation, but about a common type of mistake people make when interpreting the book inside Adventism, and that mistake is called futurism. So we're going to look at a number of the reasons that people become futurist and look at answers to some of their objections. We'll make it hopefully an easy to understand or as easy as possible to understand lecture. Before we do, let's have a prayer and then have a quiz based on yesterday's lecture. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, I ask that you'll bless us as we talk about futurism. Show us what is right and best, and show me what to say and what to leave unsaid. And I ask for your Spirit to do this in the name of Jesus. Amen. All right, so question one. And I could ask a lot of questions based on yesterday's lecture, but I'm not asking so many. What is the mystery of God? Question one, what is the mystery of God? Revelation 10 says that in the days when the seventh angel shall begin to sound, the mystery of God will be finished. What is that mystery of God that's going to be finished? Question two, what are the people waiting for in Daniel 12? You know, at the very end of that chapter, it said, blessed is he that waits and comes to the 1335th day. What are they waiting for? That's the question. I'm really regretting that I didn't do this lecture in front of a marker board. I think it would have helped a lot of you. And maybe somewhere in Audioverse there's a lecture on this that would involve a marker board or somewhere. Question three, what does the eating of the book represent in Revelation 10? You know, towards the end of that chapter, John asks for the book and the angel tells him to eat it. He eats it and it's sweet in his mouth, but it's bitter in his belly. What does that represent? And question four, why is it at the end of that chapter, Revelation 10, that God says to the church, you must prophesy again? Why again? What does that imply? And question five is, did you watch the video, the one about the 2027 and the 2031, really about time setting? Did you watch that video? Yes or no? And then number six, did you read the article? I mean, did you spend at least a half hour doing it? The article on Revelation chapter 10 at BibleDoc.org. So those are your 6 questions. And I suppose you can tell that I'm getting quite tired these days. We're done with the questions. Let's go now to the topic, futurism and its antidotes. Review from our first or second lecture. What is futurism? Futurism is the taking of prophecies that were fulfilled way in the past and putting them now in the present. That's what futurism is. Futurism, taking those prophecies from the past, putting them in the future, in the present or the future, and it's a common mistake made in Revelation. Let me give you a few reasons why people make it. The ones I can think of anyway, the people I know many people who take prophecies of the past and put them in the future. One reason is because of an ignorance of significant history. That is, if you don't know the history of Islam or the history of the Roman Empire or the history of the Greek Empire, not knowing that history can make certain parts of Daniel 8 and Daniel 11 and Revelation 6 and 8 and 9, it can make those very difficult to understand. So you might not recognize any correlation between the symbols and what happened. So you might be inclined to think those are prophecies of the future. And I know people who've done that very thing because they don't know the history. Then another reason, you might call this the second reason, is because we've cultivated an unhealthy love for what is new and exciting. New and exciting. Excitement doesn't work well in Bible study. And when we're looking for something sensational, something will grab the attention. I remember when I was young, there were some men who were teaching, based on Revelation 9, that it was about attack helicopters, because helicopters, when they're spinning, it can look like they have ladies' hair, you know, spinning out kind of gray. And anyway, people, when they looked at it, they saw helicopters there, and it was quite a exciting interpretation that people were making. People like the new and exciting. And a third thing is because we have superficial study habits. We'll look at that here in a moment. We'll look at the answers people have come to, and those answers that they've come to, many of them are just a result of not really thinking and studying carefully, taking the time to do what they need to do to come to a good answer. Another reason, one that wouldn't show up maybe to anyone, is personal sin. Do you remember what we saw in the last lecture? That none of the wicked will understand the book of Daniel. People come to false interpretations of prophecy, partly, some of them, I don't mean all, but many of them, because there's something wrong internally. There's a sin issue there, something going on. And then another reason is because those who teach the truth, and maybe I'm one of these, those that teach the truth do it in a poor way. I mean, poor quality teaching that doesn't give the best answers, doesn't give quality answers, doesn't give thorough answers. If you've never seen a cogent defense of the truth, you might think that the truth is indefensible. And finally, it's because of charismatic teachers. I mean, it's possible that a teacher who has one of these problems we've just listed, problems like ignorance of history, a love for exciting things, superficial study habits, personal sin, he's poor at teaching. It's possible a man that has those problems is a charismatic teacher. And because he's charismatic, that is, he has a personality that really gets you and grabs you and holds you, that charisma can be a means of deceiving many people. Okay, well now let's move to the Bible observations. We want to get close and then closer to avoid that experience of being a superficial student. So you have your Bibles there, don't you? Turn your Bibles to Revelation chapter 7. What I'm going to go over here is eight cases in Revelation where people see evidence for futuristic interpretations, and I'm going to show you why those evidences really are not evidences the way they think they are. Maybe that'll make more sense after we look at them. Revelation 7, and looking at verse 1 and 2. After these things I saw 4 angels standing in the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, on the sea, or on any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. So what you have in these passages is a description of God forbidding these angels to harm the earth, the sea, or any tree. Any tree at all. It sounds like the trees are protected. But now look down to chapter 8. This is the next page. Chapter 8 and verse 7. And the first angel sounded, and hail and fire followed, mingled with blood. And they were thrown to the earth. And the third of the trees were burned up. And all green grass was burned up. So I've heard people talk like this. They say Revelation 8 must be fulfilled after Revelation 7. It must be because in chapter 7 the trees are preserved, and in chapter 8 they are, many of them, a third of them, are destroyed. And my answer to that would be, sure, that's plausible. It could be that way. But it could also be that trees represent godly people, and that there are times of Earth's history when God's people have been killed and times when they've been protected. And those periods span the entire 6,000 years of Earth's history. And chapter 7 could be speaking about one when they're protected, and chapter 8 could be speaking about one when they're not. Look at chapter 9 and verse 4. They were commanded not to harm the grass of the earth, or any green thing, or any tree, but only those men who do not have the seal of the living God in their foreheads. That sounds just like what we read in chapter 7. Don't harm those that have the seal, and don't harm any tree or any of the grass. Do you remember what it said there in 8:7? Notice how much grass was burned up in 8 verse 7. All the grass was burned up. That means that chapter 9 can't come right after chapter 8 if we're taking that literalistic approach. But if again we say that the grass and the trees represent God's people, his holy people, then there are epochs and periods all through history when they're protected, when they suffer, when they don't suffer. And we just can't use these as evidence that chapters 8 and 9 come after chapter 7, which introduces the sealing of the 144,000. Maybe I should go to the second one. The second one is about the seal of God. You saw in chapter 7 that the seal of God is there. But in chapter 9, we just saw in verse 4 that those Islamic forces are told not to harm anyone that has the seal. So someone says, so chapter 9 must be in the end of time because the seal is an end of time issue. And to that I would just say, no, the verses that we use to show that the Sabbath is the seal, they're not end of the time verses. They're verses that go all the way back to the time of Moses, to the time of Ezekiel. These are verses that show that the Sabbath has always been a sign of sanctification. And yes, even in the Middle Ages, there were Sabbath keepers. There were those that had the seal, and God protected that class of people very well. So no, this isn't any evidence that we should take these trumpets and put them into the future. Look back at chapter 8, and we'll observe in chapter 3, an angel takes the censer, but look particularly in verse 5. Then the angel took the censer and filled it with fire from the altar and threw it to the earth, and there were noises and thunders and lightnings and an earthquake. Just a moment. Excuse that little pause there. My wife was locked out of our room here at the Weimar Inn, and I had to let her in. So what we saw here in Revelation chapter 8, verse 5, is the censer is cast down. And many persons have observed that Ellen White saw something just like this in the book Early Writings. And in the book Early Writings, when she saw it, it was a picture of the close of human probation, of Jesus ending his ministry in the heavenly sanctuary. Well, that's what I understand by this event. But they've reasoned like this. They've reasoned that if probation ends in verse 5, then verse 7 must be after the close of probation. And so they try to put the trumpets in the future, after the close of probation. I hope you can see that's not sensible because of what we read in chapter 10 yesterday, that when the seventh angel begins to sound, the mystery of God will be finished. That's the close of probation, and that comes towards the end of the seven trumpets, so it can't come before the first one. What's going on here? It's what we talked about 3 days ago, the parenthetical prophecy. that the trumpets are introduced in verse 2 and then again in verse 6. So verses 2 through 5 covers the 2,000 years of Earth's history and Christ's ministration. And then verses 6 through 11:19 covers the same period. And we find that those periods start with the same event, that is the introduction of the 7 trumpets, and they end with the same event, that is the voices in the thunders and the lightnings that happen towards the end. So the fourth reason is found in chapter 13. Let's turn there for a minute. We're looking at reasons why people take prophecies of Revelation that have been fulfilled in the past and put them in the future. Revelation, we're going to look at verse 3 and then verse 5. Verse 3, and I saw one of his heads, as it were, mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. And then verse 5, and he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue 42 months. Someone says, it's obvious in these verses that the church has the deadly wound is healed, and then comes these 42 months. So these 42 months must be after 1929, after the healing of the deadly wound. And I would say that sounds logical, but if we take a closer look, you'll see something very interesting. Look back at chapter 3, and you'll see in chapter 3 that when the deadly wound is healed, all the world marveled and followed the beast. That's past tense in verse 3. It's already happened. But now look down at verse, I wrote the verse number here to save me, at verse 8. And all who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names were not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. What you have between verse 3 and 8 is the world following the beast. In verse 3, it's present tense or past tense, and in verse 8, it's future tense. That means between these two, we must have gone back in time. Or if I could say it another way, that Revelation 13, 1 through 4 covers the period of about 2,000 years, and then verses 5 to the end of the chapter covers that period again with much greater detail. So that verse 5, we go way back in time to where that beast started. Finally, well, not finally, but the next one, let's go back to Daniel 12. Yeah, out of Revelation, so it's a little different than the others. But Daniel 12 has a reason that many people put things into the future that don't belong there. Daniel 12, and at that time Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was, since there was a nation, even to that time. And at that time your people will be delivered, every one who is found written in the book. You see, Jesus talked about a time in Matthew 24 of tribulation that would be the worst ever. He said worse than any before it and worse than any after it. And here you find the same thing, a trouble worse than any before it. And this is the 7 last plagues. And if these are the same event, that proves that there's a future application to many parts of Matthew 24 that have been fulfilled in the past. Well, let me explain to you that these are not the same event. Matthew 24, if you look at it, is plainly talking about the worst ever persecution of God's people, the worst ever killing of the faithful. That was the Middle Ages. That's when all those things happened. That's where the Fox's Book of Martyrs comes from, those stories. That was the worst. It's not going to be that extensive in the future. It'll be bad enough, but not like that. But what about here in Daniel 12? Is this the worst persecution? No. This is the worst punishment of persecutors. And of course, the punishment comes later. So you have two worsts, but they're not the same thing. You have in the Middle Ages the worst persecution of God's people, and in the future, the worst punishing of the persecutors. If you don't catch that, the difference between tribulation and trouble, then you could come up with that faulty conclusion. Another reason has to do with Matthew 24, the chapter we just mentioned. Matthew 24 begins, let's turn there and you can see it. Turn to Matthew chapter 24. Matthew 24 has its parallels in Mark 13 and Luke 21. Matthew 24, and look at what Jesus says in verse 2. And Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." There it was, Jesus in the huge temple that Herod had beautified, a granite temple of great proportions, and he's saying, every stone is coming down. Verse 3, now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will be these things, and what will be the sign of your coming, and of the end of the age?" Do you see they're asking for two questions that they thought was one? They were asking about the end, but they thought that that would be when the temple would be destroyed. So they asked, when are these things going to happen? That is the destruction of the temple. And when is going to be the end? And Jesus in Matthew 24, instead of telling them that those events are separate, because that might have discouraged them, to know how long a period of time, that thousands of years were still in the future between those two events. If he had told them that, they would have been discouraged. So he did something interesting. He created a prophecy that combined answers to both questions. So Matthew 24, verses 1 through 14 goes through the entire history of the world, since Christ's time to ours, covering 2,000 years. It talks about the beginning of sorrows in his day, the destruction of Jerusalem, the rise of false prophets, the rise of lawlessness, and the gospel going to the whole world. So you have in these 10 verses a covering of a long period of time. But then in verse 15, he goes back to the Middle Ages. And verses 15 all the way through to verse 28 covers again that same period, but beginning that time with the Middle Ages all the way to the end of time. Then in verse 28 we progress in an interesting way. It goes back to the persecution, to just after the persecution. This is immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened. And then you have in verse 29 to verse 31 a short coverage of the last 200 years of Earth's history. What I'm saying to you is that Matthew 24 has 3 sections of prophecies there in the first 31 verses that go from some parts talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, and other parts going right up to the very end of time. Why am I mentioning this? It's because Ellen White, in mentioning this, some have misunderstood her as if she was saying that various verses in this passage are prophecies of both events. And it isn't so. They're not prophecies of both events. Each verse can be put in a timeline, shown how it's fulfilled in each place. So because of her statement about blending those prophecies, it's one reason that many have felt that they have a reason to put prophecies into the future. The 7th reason that people move in this direction of futurism has to do with was something Ellen White said about the seven thunders that we learned about yesterday. You remember those seven thunders? They're the ones that when they announced, John was told, don't write it down, because John was being shown a vision of the time of the end when the book of Daniel was unsealed, but he was being shown the vision a long time before it happened. So at the time it was unsealed, sure, those thunders, we could know what they said. But when John was writing it, it was too early, and so those things weren't shown. Well, here's what you need to know is that Ellen White wrote about these thunders. And when she wrote about it, in one paragraph, she wrote about the thunders as if they were a prophecy of things that has already happened back in the 1840s and 50s. And the other one, she talks about it as if it's a prophecy of future events. And people have taken those two paragraphs and said, see, there are two applications to the thunders. And I would say, wait. Don't you see these two paragraphs are part of the very same short two-page document? Let's read it. And when you read it, what you see is in the first paragraph, the one that puts those thunders in the past, Ellen White is writing from her perspective, her time. But in the second paragraph, she's writing from John's perspective, his time. So from Ellen White's perspective, the thunders are past, but from John's perspective, the thunders are future. You can see that perspective right there in the article. And when people don't perceive that, well, that causes some problems. And finally, there's an interesting statement that Ellen White made. You can find this in Last Day Events and in many other places, and initially in the letters and manuscripts. She said, thunder after thunder is to sound, vial after vial is to be poured upon the earth. Something like that. And I say thunder after thunder, I mean trumpet after trumpet. Trumpet after trumpet is to sound, vial after vial is to be poured upon the earth. Trumpet after trumpet. So persons reading that have said, see, there are more, at least two trumpets are future of the seven trumpets. Maybe three, maybe four, maybe five, maybe all of them, but at least two of them have to be because it says trumpet after trumpet. Well, I just want to tell you how I understand it. First of all, at least one trumpet is future because it says in the future, trumpet after trumpet. It could be in the future, a trumpet is going to blow that is following a trumpet in the past. And following that, you'll have the seven vials. That's how I understand it. But if I don't understand it that way, my next view would be that there's going to be the seventh trumpet is going to sound, and then there's going to be the trumpet of the Lord. It's going to sound at the resurrection, 1 Thessalonians 4. Either way, you don't have any presentation that would indicate to you that there's going to be a re-fulfillment of the seven trumpets. I've written a book where I discuss why we should not expect reapplications and dual applications of prophecy. There's a whole chapter in there. I'll summarize part of that chapter, and that is that if you predict one event in the future, let's say you predict that Biden is going to be impeached his third year in the presidency. That prediction will or will not happen. But if you might by good luck get it right. You could get something like that right. And if you made a very, very vague prediction, if you said a president is going to be impeached, then if you confirmed that there's going to be an impeachment of some president sometime, that would be such a vague fulfillment that it could happen many times in history. So I just described two types of prophecies, one that's a singular event that you might get right, and one that's a vague event that might happen many times. Those kind of prophecies can have many fulfillments. I mean, At least that vague one can have many fulfillments. But what if you predicted a series of events? If someone said that Trump will win the next election and that Putin will be assassinated, and then the head of China will decide to make the country into a democracy, and then North Korea will accidentally blow itself up with nuclear weapons. If you made 4 predictions in a row like that and said they're going to start in 2024, and then those things happen in the order you said, well, the more events that you predicted in a row, the more incredible that series of predictions would be. And when the series gets to be 5 or 6 events long, it's never going to happen 2 times in history. You aren't going to have 2 times in history that these strange events all happen in this order in the same way. That's what Daniel and Revelation do. They give strings of events that are 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 events long, so that there's no way that they could be fulfilled any time twice in history without real effort to try to force people to do what they need to do, or to compel people to do things they don't want to do. I mean, the only way history can repeat itself in those kind of details is by God taking a very strong, overbearing approach and making things happen and forcing things to go the way he wants them to go. And I suppose at some point, probably some Calvinist will watch this and say, yeah, that's just how it is. And I'd say to him, read my articles on Daniel 2 and Daniel 4. I think you'd see there some evidence that it's not so, that Calvinism in its extreme form of God causing things to happen against the free will of man is just not legitimate. Okay, so what we've been talking about today is that there are many people in the Adventist church who take the trumpets or the 42 months of Revelation 13, or maybe even the 1260 years of Revelation 11 or Revelation 12, and they put these into the future. And when they do this, they're taking attention away from the legitimate fulfillment that's already happened. And why do people do it? Well, I gave you 2 sets of answers. The first set had to do with habits that lead to faulty conclusions. And the second set was specific parts of Revelation and Daniel and Matthew 24 that lend themselves to be misinterpreted in certain ways that would make people think it's okay to make futuristic applications of prophecies that were fulfilled in the past. Hey, we don't need to do it. We can find solutions plainly to these things. I think, Joshua, I'm going too fast for people. I know that all these lectures I'm getting done in like 35 minutes always take me a whole hour when I'm teaching normally. And that's because I'm carrying on a conversation with people in the class. So if you need to slow it down and explain these things, please feel authorized to do that. Let me have a prayer with you and we'll be done with our second lecture. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, I'm asking that you will bless us as we try to avoid the misunderstandings that are plaguing people so much today. Prepare us to stand in the time of trouble such as never was. And I ask for your Spirit to do this in the name of Jesus. Amen.